Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second Global Conversation webinar, this time on the future of international touring beyond Brexit. My name is Elena Cavallero, and I'm one of the project managers at Extrax, based in Manchester, UK. Extrax is a Manchester-based development organization specialized in outdoor arts. We have been running showcase events, seminars, training sessions, and professional development opportunities for nearly 20 years. We're also the manager of With Walls, which is the biggest outdoor arts consortium in the UK, dedicated to commissioning and touring new outdoor work from British artists. This webinar is the second in a series of events aimed at supporting UK and EU artists and promoters by providing practical information and advice around international touring after the UK leaves the EU in January 2021. The outdoor sector is an intrinsically international market, and most outdoor artists rely on international touring for their survival. In the aftermath of the Brexit referendum, there are growing concerns about the economic uncertainty and its potential impact on touring and the EU funding opportunities for artists. It is clear that artists and promoters want to continue working across borders. So by delivering this event, we hope to provide some clarity where possible on how a company or a festival can appropriately prepare to work internationally post-Brexit. This event also paves the way for a practical guide to Brexit, which will be published next Friday. The guide was commissioned by Extrax and has been devised by Split Second, led by Kevin Rutten and Axel Sager, in collaboration with Extrax. We are really looking forward to being able to share it with you all and continue updating it as we learn more about the regulations that will come into place. Our hope is that you will all find this guide helpful and that it will become part of yours and your colleagues' toolbox to navigate EU touring over the next few months. We will continue to research and share information to the best of our abilities. And to this end, we're looking to organize further sessions with speakers from a variety of backgrounds as we approach and enter 2021. Today, the panel is going to provide some clarity, suggestions on aspects such as visas, carnets, taxation, and offer opportunities to reflect about what international touring will look like from next year from the point of view of international and British promoters and artists. The presentations will be followed by some time for Q&A. Now, I'd like to welcome and introduce our five speakers. Kevin Rutten and Axel Sager are two highly experienced producers who share a passion for innovative performance. The worker have worked with artists including Nikki and JD, Gandini Juggling, No Fit State, Barely Methodical Troupe, Simple Cypher, and Company XY. They are founders of Split Second and have been working with us to develop the Brexit Guide. Shashi Bhatta is executive producer at Subcat Dance Company, who create exhilarating dance productions for national and international touring. They employ disabled and non-disabled artists to find innovative ways to collaborate. Amy Belfield is program manager at Motion House. Motion House creates and tours a wide range of inspiring and powerful dance circus productions, including many outdoor flexible productions to festivals and non-theatre spaces. Casper de Vries is co-founder of Entract, an agency based in the Netherlands that aims to facilitate and support festivals and companies. They're involved in the programming of a number of festivals and represent many international and UK companies, including Jolie Vian. Before we proceed with the webinar, I just want to run through a few practicalities. We received more than 80 registrations, actually 90, I think, at this point, for today's webinar from across 6 countries. And it's great to see that so many of you are watching. The session will run for 1 hour and 30 minutes, so until 3:30 p.m. if you're in the UK. It will then be followed by 30 minutes of networking, which I will tell you more at the end. Feel free to use the chat to say hello, who you are, and where you're from. If you would like to ask the panelists questions, please use the Zoom Q&A function. For access purposes, we're providing live captioning. To activate your captions, simply click on the button that says Captions. Also for access purposes, we'll all be describing ourselves. So I'm Elena, she, her, I'm white with dark hair, and I'm wearing a black dress. We are recording the session and we'll make these available on the Extrax website after the event alongside the Brexit Guide. Feel free to comment, post, and tweet about the session, and make sure to follow Extrax on our social media. Finally, a few questions will come up as you exit the webinar, and we'd kindly ask you to take 2 minutes to give us some feedback. I will now hand over to our chairs and speakers, Kevin and Axel, to kickstart the webinar.
Hi everyone, I'm Kevin, and today I'm wearing a black t-shirt, black rimmed glasses, and I've got dark hair. My pronouns are he, him.
Hi everyone, my name is Axel. My pronouns are he and him. I am white, I have dark hair, and today I'm wearing a yellow jumper.
So we are the co-founders and producers of Split Second. We produce and tour a portfolio of artists blurring the lines between circus, dance, and theatre. We create projects to support the development of artists and producers, and we work to strengthen the sector through consultation, research, and being an active voice in international networks. And we've been collaborating with Extracts on producing this guide over the past 6 weeks, and we're excited to introduce some elements of it today.
So today's webinar will be divided in 3 main sections. First, Kevin and I will introduce the guide, how we created it, and how it's structured. We'll introduce the 7 companies that we interviewed for the case study, and then we'll introduce the key findings of our guides and present a breakdown of the additional costs UK companies can expect when touring work to Europe post-Brexit. In the second section of the webinar, we'll hear directly from the case study companies and how they are preparing and adapting for Brexit. And finally, we'll have a Q&A session where you can ask panelists direct questions.
So to begin with, we're going to talk about how we produced the guide. So we interviewed a series of 7 case study companies. 5 were from the UK, 2 from Europe. And in identifying these companies, we worked with Extracts to ensure they represented a wide range of profiles from small, mid to large scale. And with each of the companies, we focused on a specific production in their repertoire, drilling in to look at details such as the touring parties, nationalities, set costume that goes on the road, a bit of their business model. So what percentage of the company's touring is European? And we used all of this information to produce sample budgets of the forecast additional costs to tour post-Brexit. As I said, these were conducted through interviews. All companies were asked the same questions, and these consisted of frequently asked questions from the sector. And we used these interviews to build a kind of closest picture of how companies are preparing to tour post-Brexit.
To complement these guides, and in addition to the case studies, we have also drawn on the available official guidelines to give a legislative framework to the examples given by the companies, and also fill in the gap when some of the answers, the questions we asked were left unanswered. We have used the most up-to-date official legislation from different sources, including the UK government and the transition website, Arts Council England guidelines, and the European Union website. In some instances, we have also asked colleagues to share with us their expertise on some of the more difficult questions, including carnet and visa. So we would like to take this opportunity to thank Jade Dunbar, co-director of Paris of the Caribbean, and Ian Smith, who runs the UK Artwork website, who helped us put the final touches to the guides. We hope that by combining examples and official guidelines, this guide will give you, artists and producers, relevant and clear information. So now I'm going to introduce to you the 5 UK companies that we interviewed. First, we have Jolivian, and we use their show Lancement en l'air. Then Motion House with Wild, Thingy Magic with Ghost Caribou. Then we have the show Sense of Unity performed by Dundu and World Beaters, that's represented and produced by Activate. And finally, Frock by Stopgap Dance Company.
And the companies and productions were Échappée Belle from Ad Hoc, based in France, and Tus Extremos by Hurrican, based in Spain and represented by Ontract in the Netherlands. So to give an overview of the structure of the guide and the content that's included, the guide sits over 4 main areas. The first being the administrative impact and considerations. This covers national insurance, VAT, travel and health insurance, contracting, staffing capacity, and their relationship with the EU funders post-Brexit. The second section looks at artists' travel and movement of people, looking at visas, the ETIAS scheme, artists' access considerations. Section 3 looks at movement of goods and vehicles, looking at EORI, ATA carnets and vehicles crossing borders and people driving in the EU. And then the whole last section is a kind of examination of touring in the landscape post-Brexit. So some companies give an insight into creative solutions to these new challenges. We gauge appetite for EU touring, both from companies' perspectives and from festivals, and then some wider considerations when structuring tours and approaching the creation of work. Just a note on the final product, the guide will take shape as a micro website that can evolve over time as answers become more available as we approach the deadline for negotiating a deal. And as Elena said, we hope this becomes a useful part of everyone's toolbox as we navigate EU touring over the next coming months and year. The micro website will be published next Friday, and everyone who's signed up to today's webinar will receive a notification when that's live.
So now Kevin and I are going to take a few minutes to go through the key findings of our guide. The guide that we worked on covers a wide range of topics, and it would be impossible to give you a digest of it in just a few minutes. So we have decided to focus on going through the main additional costs that companies might expect when touring work to Europe post-Brexit. We have divided this cost in 3 main sections. First, movement of people. Second, movement of goods. And third, overhead. So I'm going to start now with movement of people. Here we are focusing on 4 different additional budget lines that companies might want to consider: visa, work permits, health insurance, and ETIAS. So first, looking at visas. So until we have a final deal between the UK and the EU on Brexit, we won't be sure what the situation will be regarding visas. But it's widely expected that UK citizens will need visa to travel to Europe. In the guide, we will go a little deeper into the different types of visa and the application process with examples from the case study companies. So here we make the distinction between 2 different types of visa: country-specific visas and Schengen visas. The country-specific visa will allow you, obviously, to travel to one specific country. The cost for this visa depends on the country where you're going to. A Schengen visa will allow you to travel to multiple countries inside the Schengen zone. At the moment, they are advertised at €80 or £73, but we cannot guarantee at this stage that that price will remain the same after Brexit. In both cases, visas are valid for 90 days in a period of 180 days. They're usually valid for a year, but some of them can last up to 5 years. I know that some of the companies we talk to have experience with longer visas, and I'm sure they will share with us a bit more about that when we talk to them. Then we have work permits, of course. So once you've obtained a visa, you will be able to travel within the Schengen area, but you may need to obtain a work permit, depending on the country where you're going. So before traveling, always check with the local organizer what the rules are in the country where you will perform. A number of countries have special rules for artists or creative workers when they stay for a very short period of time. In such cases, those countries may waive the condition to apply for a work permit and the cost associated to that. Now we're looking at health insurance. So until the end of the transition period, British citizens can easily access healthcare when in Europe, thanks to their European Health Insurance Cards, sometimes called EHIC. Again, until we have a final decision on the Brexit deal, we cannot know for sure what the system will be like next year. but the British government is currently advising that people should book their own travel insurance separately. On the slide here, we have listed some costs, but they are just an indication that we wanted to give you. The cost for insurance can vary hugely from one insurance company to another, and depending on your specific situation. So we really advise you to look for yourself and see what's the best insurance deal you can find. So finally, for the movement of people, we're looking at ETIAS. We know that lots of people have questions about ETIAS, so we've included that here in these slides, but actually based on our findings, we think that it's maybe not so relevant for touring companies. ETIAS stands for European Travel Information and Authorization System. It's a new additional entry requirement for visa-exempt travelers that will be introduced by the EU in 2022. It's actually very similar to the ESTA document most of us need to get when traveling to the USA. However, ETIAS is only valid for short tourist trip, business and medical visits. And the way the EU defines business trip is attending a meeting, a conference or an event. In all other cases, like performing at a festival, you will probably need to apply for a visa and get a work permits. Therefore, unless it's for attending a conference or going on a holiday, it's highly unlikely you need to have an ETIAS when traveling for work. So now we're looking at the movement of goods post-Brexit. Here we have 3 different types of cost: carnet, additional driving times, and EORI. First, let's talk about carnet. I'm sure many of you have questions about that. So like many other aspects of this budget, we cannot know for sure if we'll need carnet post-Brexit, but it's widely expected that we will have to have carnet when transporting equipment to Europe. For those of you who are not familiar with carnet, here's a short definition. A carnet is an international custom and temporary export-import document. It is used to clear custom on goods that will be returning home within 12 months. So it's essentially a passport for your sets when you transport equipment and bring it back home afterwards. And it's very difficult to give an estimate of how much companies should budget for carnets, because the cost of carnet depends usually from one situation to another. The cost is based on the value of the sets, where you're going, and how long you're going away for. So it's really hard to give you a clear estimate, but based on the conversation we've had with the different companies we talked to, it's safe to assume that a standard carnet costs between 500 and 700 pounds. And I remind you that those carnets are valid for a year, usually. In the guides, we've included more information on carnet, such as how to get them, a more precise estimate of price, and other sort of useful information. We've also included a great example from Motion House regarding carnet. I'm sure Amy, who represents Motion House today, will talk to us a bit more about her experience later. So now we're looking at additional driving time. So this cost might not be as obvious as the other costs that we've listed. But once we'll have to provide carnet to cross borders between the UK and EU, we can expect longer waiting lines at custom, where you get your carnet checked and stamped. This might impact how long it will take for your set to arrive at destination, and therefore adds to your driving times and cost. So here we are thinking mostly about additional hours for the drivers and possibly additional accommodation in Belgium. But again, until we know for sure what's going to happen, it's really hard to predict. And I'm sure with time, the process will be more clear and easier. Finally, we're looking at EORI. So again, we've included EORI in this list because we know that many of you had questions about it. But based on our findings, we think that most of you won't need to get an EORI number. So an EORI number, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is an Economic Operators Registration and Identification Number. It's a mouthful. It's an EU number for businesses which undertake to import or export goods in and out of the EU with the intent of selling it. So in most cases, outdoor arts companies are not importing or exporting goods in the view to sell these goods. Most of the time it's sets that you bring back, and in which case you're in the carnet. But still, in the guide, we've included a section on EORI what it means exactly, what it covers, and how you get it.
The next section of considerations and costs are around overheads and taxes. So the first being VAT. And like many of the other elements, until the final negotiations between UK and EU are finalised, we'll not know exactly how Brexit will affect VAT on services. However, from the conversations with the case study companies and our own research, it's speculated that there'll be little difference to how it works now, in which case companies can continue to not charge VAT to EU festivals who are valid EU VAT registered, and that the festivals themselves will account for local VAT using the reverse charge procedure. So assuming that we're not expecting additional costs around VAT, but it is an area to watch as we approach the deadline for negotiations. The next section is around visa and visa sponsorship license. So currently, UK organisations need a visa sponsorship license if they invite someone from outside of Europe to work for them in the UK. Post-Brexit, it's unclear what requirements will be needed for EU artists to work in the UK, but organisations may require a sponsorship licence to support artists getting a visa. This won't be relevant for all companies. Companies could also rely on UK institutional partners, for example, festivals or venues, to sponsor the artists that they're working with. However, if you're working with a lot of EU artists, and again, depending on the level of work that you're doing, you might want to consider having your own visa sponsorship license, in which case we include this cost as a reference. So the fee itself is dependent on the type of license you need and the size of business, and they start at 526 for a period of 4 years. In the report, we reference the legal responsibilities that having this license and processing visa sponsorships brings. And I know Sho from Stopgap also has this license. So again, may speak a little bit about it later, or we can prompt some questions if there's any more information required. The next section is on international driving permits. So this is another cost consideration. It's not yet known if a British driving licence will be sufficient to drive in the EU post-Brexit. You may need an international driving permit to drive in some countries, and this will depend on which country you're visiting and how long you're staying. It's not a complex process to get. They're $5.50 per person per permit per year, but it is just worth flagging that one is required per driver rather than per vehicle. So it's attached to the driver's license itself. The final section around overheads is project management. From all our conversations with case study companies and beyond, it's safe to expect that additional resource will be required to manage these processes. However, pricing and structures will vary greatly depending on the organisation, perhaps whether you're project funded, regular funded, and just how much you rely on income from EU touring. But around solutions, some of the case study companies spoke about part-time administrative support right the way through to employing a new project manager to lead on the additional admin and resource around Brexit touring. So lastly, on the slides, just around who's picking up these costs. These costs, of course, could be split across multiple festivals, presenters. So again, just something to think about when structuring tours. So for the last section of our presentation for now, we take these cost considerations and apply them to an example piece of work touring from UK to EU post-Brexit. So in this example, we're looking at a company of 4 UK citizens going to a 4-country EU tour with a van, with set, and with 1 driver. So you'll see in this budget template, we've got 4 Schengen visas, 4 health insurance with the cost approximation. We've got the carnet included, as set would be moving in a van. We've got the permit around that international or driving license in EU. And then we've drafted kind of proposed additional driving time, an extra day accommodation per diems, and then estimated project costs, project management costs at 2 days around the administration to get this work happening. So again, these are costs that could be split across multiple festivals. The guide itself offers these budget templates for all of the case study company productions. And we hope that that's a useful kind of insight into how the costs will scale depending on scale of work, number of people touring, whether you're touring with kit, set, equipment. And hopefully this is useful in starting to forecast your own post-Brexit EU touring. So that is the end of our structured presentation. So we move into the next part of the webinar. So we're going to invite the rest of the panelists to join us on screen. And as they're doing that, just a reminder that this section, we're asking a series of structured questions to each of the panelists to get an insight into how their companies are adapting and coming up with solutions to touring post-Brexit. So thanks for joining us, panelists. And for the first question, if you could also introduce yourself, your role in the company, and give a little bit of context around the case, the production that we case studied, that would be great to build some context. And the first question for the panel is, what plans are you making for your company to prepare for Brexit? And we're going to start off with Sho.
Hello, I'm Sho. I'm executive producer at Stopgap Dance Company. My pronouns are he, she, he, him, and I'm wearing a round brown pair of glasses, got black hair. I'm East Asian in origin and a neglected beard on my face. So in regards to what we're preparing, oh yeah, and also about the context of the show, sorry. So we are, the case study that we use for this study is FROC, which is the small to medium scale outdoor production, has 6 dancers and 3 support people traveling. And yeah, it was commissioned by Without Walls last year. So it was touring last year. And all of the tour that we were due to do, obviously, like everyone else, got cancelled this year. So we're in a process of having conversations with everyone who booked the show this year, potentially touring next year. And I think the negotiations are a little bit difficult, even without Brexit, because of the COVID situation. I think all of the programmers are committed to wanting to bring the show, but it really depends on local situations and how it pans out over the next few months. Yeah, the only country that is very forward in booking us is Japan. That's partly because we do have a trade agreement now, and we were due to be there for the Paralympics and its cultural program, which obviously has been postponed in entirety to next year. But even they are uncertain of the scale of the budget cuts, because postponing the games is costing them billions. Yes. In regards to Brexit, though, the preparation we are making is a little bit like what Kevin and Axel have done in terms of just costing what might be the charges in taking artists around Europe. It is quite difficult to estimate because the factors are quite complex now with the COVID situation and Brexit, and the impact on costs, not only for us, but also on festivals. So we are almost now kind of creating an A to Z of what could go wrong and what the costs might be per journey of the entirety of the tour, and then constantly monitoring the cost to benefit and whether it's financially viable for us at all. Yeah, to be honest, I think the worst case scenario, we're perhaps even looking at not having a tour at all next summer. And I think we're a little bit unique in that a bulk of our personnel are continuing to shield with the COVID. And in reality, until the vaccinations are made available, potentially some of them could be risking their lives when touring or even stepping out the door, to be honest. So there may well be a situation that we might not be able to tour at all. So our worst case scenario actually is no tour at all. But in the longer run, actually, we are remaining optimistic because maybe there won't be a proactive touring program available next year because of the COVID. And maybe next year will be the time when all of the culture sector in Europe and in the UK spend a little bit of time readjusting. And when everyone's sort of more back to normal, as it were, in 2022, we might be in a better position to be touring. So anyway, it's very much a wait and see game at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, this came up in a few companies as well, that we've almost lost this transition year to COVID. So people are looking to 2021 to see what some of these new ways of working are in practicality. Do you also want to mention briefly, show your core funded position, because it's a unique perspective across the panel?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate that we're NPO, National Portfolio Organisation. So we get a commitment from Arts Council England to have a quarterly income for operational costs. And the flip side of COVID actually is all projects in the foreseeable future are off the table temporarily. So our budget is very fluid. It is possible to perhaps cancel some of the programs to create budgets for contingency for related to COVID, related to Brexit. So yeah, we are putting contingency budget in for additional, predominantly project management costs. Yeah. So we are doing that, but I think as a sort of a negotiating stance, we would be starting to ask the festivals in terms of what they might be able to afford of additional costs incurred by Brexit, and then having that kind of conversation with the organisations too.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you very much. And same question to Amy from Motion House. So what plans are you making for your company ahead of Brexit to prepare?
Hi everyone, I'm Amy. I'm program manager at Motion House. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman. Today I'm wearing a light blue V-neck jumper. I have blonde hair, which is up in a bun, and I'm wearing dark blue rimmed glasses. So the case study that we were part of, we used Wild, which is one of our outdoor shows. It's one of our larger scale outdoor shows. It premiered in 2019. It was supposed to have a really good tour 2020, which obviously didn't happen. And it's a 6-person show with 9 people on the road, and it has quite a large complex set, which travels in a large van or a truck. So yeah, when all the cancellations came through for this year, we had lots of interest to rebook for 2021, which was really great to see that people wanted our work, and that the interest from Europe was still there. And now what's really interesting is that now I'm getting around to actually putting a tour in place for next year. The uncertainties are really coming to the fore, and a lot of people I'm talking to, festivals, venues, are just so uncertain about the future that they're saying we can't make any decisions right now. Come back to us in December or come back to us in January. So that's what I'm hearing a lot right now. I think the will to work with us is still there, but there's just so many questions up in the air that it's really hard to confirm anything or make any firm decisions. So I think that's going to have a really quite a big knock-on effect when it comes to the timeline of booking and tour booking. I think everything's going to happen much later. All these conversations are going to happen much later once we know more, once Brexit, we actually come out of the EU in January, and we see what the situation is with visas. We see what all the extra costs might actually be in reality, rather than educated guesses, which is what we're doing right now. So yeah, it's really, the will is there, but nobody can move forward right now until we know much more of the reality of the situation.
Brilliant, thank you, Amy. And then same question for Casper. You can introduce yourself as well.
After I unmute. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Casper. I'm a 54-year-old Caucasian male with a gray sweater. And on my background, you see a picture of the new show of Hurricane. I represent, amongst other companies, Hurricane, but Kevin and Alex interviewed me about the touring of this company. So this is how we got to talk a lot, and I gave a lot of information of all the things I know, and I appeared to know a little bit more than I thought I knew. Because actually, yes, we are preparing for Brexit, and it's hard to discover whether it's now Brexit or Corona, but there's very little movement between the UK and the rest of the EU in terms of touring. Absolutely no new bookings come up. Yes, some shows were booked for 2020, and we are talking about that it would probably be possible to rebook it in 21, but everybody's doubting if we could organize anything at all. So I think it has a lot more to do with COVID than it has to do with Brexit. I sense that there is a great interest between European programmers for UK shows. There is still the wish to be able to invite them. And I also sense that they hesitate because they don't know what's going to be the rule and what will they get into if they do this in Brexit year. The other way around is exactly the same. British organizers are very much interested in work from the EU, amongst others, Hurricane, who now have 2 new shows on the way. But the other way around is the same. We don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know how the rules will be. So everything feels like a little bit on hold at the moment. And we are looking at what the situation will be, and especially since we work very closely to the companies, we tried to imagine what would all be possible to prepare all the different scenarios we've put on the table, and for most of the companies, choices have been made in every situation or every change of rule, how to respond to it. I think this is the most important for now.
Brilliant, yeah. And I know in some of the questions later on, we'll start to look at what those changes might be for those companies. So thanks for that. Thanks for the input so far. Over to Axel.
Yeah, we're moving on to the next question. So the next question is, how does Brexit affect the way you are preparing for an international tour? For example, have you made any changes to budget forecasts? Are there any additional clauses you're considering adding to contracts? So first, Amy, and I was thinking maybe you can share with us a bit more about your experience with Malta in autumn 2019.
Yeah, so when prepping for the upcoming tour next year, just a bit of context, we normally have a budget, a sort of overarching budget that we would sort of tweak and amend as we go. But due to the uncertainties provided by Brexit and COVID as well, we've actually kind of got 3 versions of the budget on the go because we just don't know what's going to happen. We've kind of got a good scenario, a middling scenario, and a worst case scenario. Worst case scenario looks like we could end up losing 80% of our touring. We have to plan for the worst case just in case it happens. We also know due to COVID that some European countries will be looking to bring in only artists from their own country, so as travel between countries might be prohibited. So we're assuming possibly fewer gigs in the EU because of that as well. So that's all forming our overall budget preparations. And yeah, when it comes to financing the tour and looking at financial viability, we're obviously, like everyone, trying to estimate all the costs. So that's visas, things like international driving permits, and trying to add them all up and see what the additional cost is going to be to us. And our initial approach was to come up with a number, see if we could split it across how many gigs we thought we were going to get next year, and then pass on that cost to the festivals. But actually, when we looked at it, we didn't want to price ourselves out of the market. Unfortunately, some UK companies are going to look much less attractive to European festivals, and you need to take that into consideration. So it's a bit of a balancing act. We've used contingency budgets to assume some of the costs ourselves, as well as passing them on. But yeah, everyone's going to have to look at that balance. And yeah, when we're looking at the individual costs, we were looking at visas and carnets, as you said. So last year, about this time last year, actually, we were in the position where we had a gig in Malta, which is in the EU, in early November. And obviously this time last year, Brexit was kind of meant to happen at the end of October. So we found ourselves in a position where we were like, we might need a carnet to do this gig. And we'd never prepared a carnet before. We'd always used the shipping company or the freight company. They'd always done it for us. So it was the first time we were going to have to do it ourselves. It didn't end up happening, obviously, because Brexit kind of got pushed, but we had it basically all prepared and ready to go if we needed it. And I think when it comes to prepping a carnet, we were really daunted by the process. We'd never done it before. It's a really important document because if they're not going to let you over that border, you're screwed. So we were really daunted by doing it ourselves, but actually we found the process quite straightforward. And we're now in a much better position going forward when we think we're going to need a carnet to tour to do it ourselves. So we relied quite heavily on our local Chamber of Commerce, which is who you go to apply for your carnet. Birmingham is our closest one, and they had we rang them up and asked for advice, and they had a dedicated person there who knew all about carnets, was kind of an expert in it, and he was so helpful and really held our hand through it. So if you're having to do it for the first time and you don't quite know what you're doing, or you have specific questions, get in touch with your local Chamber of Commerce who issues carnets, because they were so helpful for us. And yeah, our carnet was I think it was around the 550 to 600 pounds. This was for Wild. And so if you budget around, as you said, 500 to 700, I think you're covered. And yeah, you do it all online, you submit it. And then what I was also really, really surprised was the turnaround time. So if you submit it by a certain time, you can go and pick it up on the same day, or it's next working day. It's super quick, which I really wasn't expecting, not knowing much going in, but it's super quick. And when we were prepping for it, we were worried because obviously Brexit Day was coming. We were like, is there going to be is the demand for carnets going to go through the roof and it's going to be backlogged, and oh my god, are we going to be able to get one? And actually when we spoke to people, they were like, we've hired more staff, they're working longer hours, so we are prepared for the backlog, so don't worry, the timeline should still be in place to get it turned around same day or next working day. So hopefully that stands true when it happens in January. If you're anything like us, we won't be touring until spring, summer. So hopefully by the time we get there, these processes will be smoothed out even more. But yeah, the main takeaway I want people to know is that the process isn't as bad as you think, and it's perfectly doable. It is admin time and it is the cost of the carnet, but it's perfectly doable for each company to prepare it and have it ready to go.
I have two additional questions for you around carnets. Can you actually, what does a carnet look like? It sounds very mysterious. Is it a piece of paper?
Yeah. And the reason why you have to go in when it's ready, you have to go and pick it up, or they post it to you. So we were going to go pick ours up because it's got loads of foils on it, and it's lots of coloured bits of paper. So yeah, it's not something you can just print out, unfortunately. But yeah, and they take it comes with vouchers, which you get as many as you need for the itinerary that you submit. And so those are the foils that you kind of take off.
Okay. And then my second question on carnets is, like, can you explain a bit more how the cost of a carnet is assessed?
Yeah, so the actual like issuing fee, which is kind of the basic fee, for us was about 320 quid, something like that. That's kind of,
And that's standard, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you've got a security kind of cost. So there's two ways of doing a security cost. You can either give a deposit, which obviously you get back once the goods come back and everything's okay. But when we did ours, it was quite a lot of money. It was like thousands of pounds. And because we'd never done it before, we didn't want to put that money on the line. We didn't want to gamble with it when we weren't quite sure of the process, having never done it. So we chose the other option, which is you pay a one-off non-returnable fee. And I think for the 12-month carnet, that was like a couple of hundred. So yeah, combined, it's around that 500 upwards mark. And I think the security costs are based on the value of the goods that you're transporting. And then if you need more vouchers, if you're doing more trips, you can add more vouchers on at a later date for a small fee. That it's good, so you can amend your kind of carnet in that way. The one thing you can't amend is the list of your goods. That really needs to be accurate. It really needs to be up to date, because if you realize you've forgotten something, you're going to have to go through the whole process again.
Great. Thank you very much, Amy. Sho, do you have, I know that you took a show to Switzerland recently, which sounds a lot like going to the EU.
Yeah, well, the new EU relationship status. Yeah, no, carnet, again, like with Amy, we were quite put off by the idea to begin with, but when we actually went through the process, it wasn't as bad as that. One thing that was a bit of a surprise is that when we took the Eurotunnel from Folkestone to France, the office that you have to get the stamping is really important with a carnet. The stamp office is actually in the port, so you had to drive all the way over to the port and then back to the Eurotunnel again. So yeah, just if they are going to be queues at Eurotunnel or Dover, you probably want to make sure you go to the right place to begin with. And then once you finish with a carnet, you have to send it back to the Chamber of Commerce as well, which is another obligation. And then, yeah, in terms of actual sort of getting into Switzerland, it was pretty relaxed, actually. They didn't even really check the goods. So if there's queues of vans, you probably get away with not having your van inspected unless you look really dodgy. Yeah, so I think it's really important to have like your core kit listed. In our experience, we were also advised to put down absolutely every part of your set. But, you know, then they're not going to check the every sort of little bars and nuts and bolts and how many you've got of that. So if you miss out a few little details, it's probably not too bad, but core essential kit, you definitely don't forget. Yeah.
Great. And also I wanted to ask you, because you work with performers with access needs, so I'm sure you thought about that and how Brexit will impact them and how they can work. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so when we tour with some disabled artists, they need to have support worker go along with them. And we're very fortunate in the UK that we have something called the Access to Work scheme, which is issued by Department for Work and Pensions. So that retrospectively covers almost all costs incurred in having support worker come on the road or participate in your work activities. The difficulty with Access to Work, though, is it's quite ambiguous what they will and won't reimburse you for. And you only kind of really find out once you've submitted your claim what's going to come back. So it's actually really anti-business, because you're kind of footing the bill and they're not really knowing how much of it you're going to get back. So it's a bit of a cash flow nightmare sometimes. But yeah, with Brexit and all the additional cost involved in for the support worker. There are no guidelines at the moment of what Access to Work will pay for. So that's another thing to take into consideration if we had to get the support worker, obviously the visa as well, and who's going to pay for that. So yeah, again, that's another kind of unknown that the government has to sort of issue out, but we'll wait and see.
Thank you, Sho. And so, Casper, do you have any thoughts on this question? How does Brexit affect the way you are preparing for an international tour?
Well, now I could talk for hours and hours, I think, because we have more than one company, but there is so much to think about, and it's so present in our daily life. But I would like to start with saying that the reduction in number of bookings cross EU, UK borders has a lot to do with that we are in a mist. We don't know. And I believe firmly that at the moment, rules and regulations are decided, and when we know what we are up to, that it will start again communicating, and that companies will be booked in both ways. I have to deal with both ways, and I discovered at the same time it's Corona, but there is one other thing. The EU decided now recently in September on new guidelines for environmental measurements on Erasmus Plus, on Creative Europe, and some other European schemes that support culture. And I also note that more and more artists are very aware of the excessive amount of travel we make in our business. And many of them ask, could we do this more smartly? Well, Brexit might help us here a little bit, because I see Hurricane traveling to UK being seen by 2 other programmers. So the next year they have 2 bookings in the UK. There they are seen by 4 other festivals. So the next year they go 4 times to the UK. The additional cost now with visa, carnet, and tax regulations will probably encourage us a lot to bring those programmers together and to make smart touring possible. It's not only having to do with Brexit, but everywhere in Europe, I think we are looking to make smart touring and to try to find cooperation between bookers, between festivals, to make traveling more logic, more Corona-proof, and a lot more efficient. We are working on a map of Europe with all the festivals and gig possibilities in Europe with their dates. It's a huge amount of work, but I think in the end we will need it anyway. So we started to do this. This is about touring. So I hope we can get systems where bookers find bookers and start to cooperate and make the touring possible in either both directions. The other thing is that I work with 3 companies from the UK, and we come up with some different solutions for these companies. Jolly Vian, that you mentioned, are German-Irish now, which is a big blessing, because if needed, they can jump in a split second to the EU and work based from there. So they are on the good side, no matter what happens. They prefer to stay in the UK, that's clear, but if needed, they can move. Imre Bernat is London-based, London, UK taxpayer, but originally from Budapest. And if needed, he will switch back to Budapest if is necessary for making a living out of his work. He will do it. And the other company that I would like to mention here is Wally Range All Stars, our beloved company from Manchester. And for them, jumping to the EU is not a very simple thing. So I would have never thought that they would bring it up, but they did, but in a slightly different way. We are looking at opportunities, possibilities, and I think I might have found something that, for example, they take the set of one show out of their scheme in the UK and they put it in a warehouse in somewhere near Antwerp. And that we set up another system with a second organization where they can perform their shows in the EU based from Antwerp. And there is another consideration with them, but also with Jolly Vian, very clearly to make double cast, double set. So the show can have a separate set and cast in the UK as it might have in the EU. That might cause some problems, but it might be a solution as well. I have specialists looking at the possibilities to make an EU-based organization that could host more than one company and take care of their, let's say, invoices with their income, and to see if it might work, if it might give something extra, if you could put something in between an organization to make working in the EU a little bit more easy, at least. Well, that's, I think, most important.
Thank you, Casper. I think you also answered our third question, which is thinking about the future touring landscape. What creative solutions are you thinking about? So yeah, you covered a lot of the points that we wanted to cover today. But actually, I might ask Amy, because I know that we talked about when we interviewed you for the case study, we talked about some of the points that Casper raised, and you had a slightly different approach to some of those points, like working with an agent, having a second cast, etc.
Yeah, I think if you've got a 2-man show or 3-man show, I think having a second cast based in the EU might be a good option. For us, we've got 6 people in the show, 9 on the road. It's just financially not possible to have a second cast. We are looking, or it's a possibility of possibly housing a set in Europe. We were thinking sort of northern France or somewhere like that, so that we don't have to move the goods between the two. But we need to assess demand and work out the financial viability of that plan before we can enact on it. But it's definitely something we're thinking about. But as I said, we're assessing the demand and seeing if it's really needed. And yeah, again, we are also kind of considering registering like a sister company in the EU, but again, it would really need to be worth it. And I imagine the admin of that and the tax implications might make it not necessarily advantageous. But again, we're considering all options at this point. And I think when
quick sub question, and what would be the benefits of having a sister company in Europe for you?
Well, if once the tax situation is, we've got some more clarification on it, then it could be advantageous from a tax point of view. But we just don't know yet.
Yeah. But presumably that won't change anything for visas, I guess.
Yeah, well, we'll have our cast based in the UK, so visas wise, they're going to have to come from the UK. We've got 2 Spanish performers, so hopefully they're going to be fine. But it's the Brits that we now have to worry about. And one of the first things we did when Brexit kind of happened was getting settled status in the UK for our Spanish performers. So they're sorted. It's now the Brits that we've got to worry about, and the visa situation is slightly concerning because we just don't know what's going to happen, and we're waiting for further confirmation. But going forward and looking at what we can do about these challenges looking forward, we are certainly looking at the flexibility of our offer with our outdoor rep, and we're thinking about bringing back older shows that are perhaps smaller in size. If people's budgets are being cut and they don't have the money to spend on the bigger shows, then offering smaller shows and having that flexibility to respond to any inquiries we get. So that's certainly something we're thinking about, just so we're not relying on the bigger outdoor stuff doing the tours that they used to, because that's not probably going to happen like it used to.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And Sho, how does Stopgap imagine? Do you have any creative solutions to Brexit? What are your plans?
Yeah, it's very difficult to plan for things when there's so many uncertainties. But I mean, I'm kind of holding optimism that we will eventually work things out. Like Casper said, there's will on both sides to make things happen. So I think, once we have clarity of what things are going to cost, it might take some time, but we will get there, I think, in terms of arranging things. Yeah, and on a flip side, kind of slightly alluded to it earlier, but in many ways, COVID is the bigger issue. And actually financial modeling for that is kind of slightly overshadowing or overtaking the financial implications of what might be with Brexit. So in some ways, it kind of put the situation in context. And I think I feel a lot less anxious about Brexit than I perhaps was before the pandemic. Yeah, so yeah, not so much creative solution, but I think we're less afraid of what the implications might be. And also one of the things that came out, and I think you guys read this too, but the recent Arts Council guidelines on how to prepare for Brexit, which was kind of useless. Sorry, I hope there's no one from the Arts Council here. But it's not their fault anyway, that it's pretty vague. But one of the things I spotted was the government indemnity scheme for goods, for like cultural exports and imports, and how the government has actually put aside some money for institutions to be able to take out a basically free insurance for any artworks that come into the country that is too costly for people, for insurers to insure commercially. And I just wondered whether, you know, if there's one kind of scheme like that, shouldn't there be a scheme for cultural exports and imports to try and keep things flowing between us? And if the soft power is such a priority for this government, then maybe there's a case we could argue for something like that for cultural exports. But yeah, maybe it's one of those things that we might throw at the Arts Council, considering the comprehensive spending review was kind of trashed a few weeks ago. So maybe it's one of those conversations we might think about starting with the Arts Council and the government going forward.
Great, thank you very much. So I guess what I hear from all of you now is that Brexit is going to be tough, but there's hope. I see you all nodding. Great. Hopefully today's webinar and the guide will help people to find answers.
Excellent. And just to feed in a few of the some of the other case study companies we're looking at, some are talking about diversifying income. So looking at focus on UK touring workshops, kind of making for other companies as a kind of transition whilst they figure out the next year. And then a few different companies as well picked up on the environmental impact as well, and just around changing how we structure tours, what the potential with that is. So it's been nice to hear from a few different companies today, just that's also their considerations. Well, thank you so much for that insight. We're going to open up to questions from the attendees now. So just a reminder, there's a question and answer box rather than just the chat box. So if you want to paste questions into that, I'll direct them to our panelists. I wanted to start just with one question whilst some questions come in, and it's just around what the greatest risk is at the moment when you're planning EU touring. What's the greatest risk to consider? And who wants to answer?
I don't see any risk in touring. The corona is a risk, but it's got nothing to do with the Brexit. And I see a lot of programmers at the moment fighting their way back to be able to present shows in festival kinds of settings. It's survival of the fittest, but fit has nothing to do with your physical condition. It has to do with if you fit, if you can adapt. And festival makers are like artists. They are really clever in finding new ways to make festivals happen. So I'm pretty sure next summer we will have nice festivals and UK artists touring in the EU and vice versa. But the festivals might be slightly different.
Excellent, excellent. All right, I'm going to dip into questions that are starting to come in. So a question from Andrew Loretto on carnets. So what happens if you need to replace a key piece of equipment whilst on tour, and that is possibly with a different specification or make? How would that affect the carnet? So a really specific question on, I guess, if kit changes from it going out to it coming back in. Casper.
Yeah, I had it once, really, with the company The Lunatics when we were traveling to South America, and something broke and we replaced it, but you could hardly tell any difference, and the specifications were different, but they will never make any problem of this. Anybody would understand. The carnet is really meant to make sure that what you take outside of the country will come back. But basically, it's all about if you're not selling the whole bunch and come back with nothing. So if there is slight difference between things, no problem at all, never.
Sure, Amy, is that a similar experience for you?
Yeah, I think technically you're not supposed to, but if we took our set wild, it was a bunch of poles and we replaced one pole for another pole, sure they're not going to know. So yeah, it's just making sure that the list doesn't change way too much. Otherwise you do need to get a whole new carnet.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I second that. The chances are they won't even notice because, you know, they're not specialists in any particular industry, anything. So chances are they won't notice. So I probably wouldn't even tell them.
Excellent. So I'll stick on the topic of carnets then, because there's a few others that are coming in. From Stefano, do you need a carnet if you're traveling by airplane? Axel, do you want to speak about this?
Yeah, sure. So
By airplane.
and based on the research we did for the guide, I mean, if you transport your sets in hand luggage, you don't need a carnet. Like, you just travel as a tourist, and that's fine. You need a carnet if you transport your sets in a vehicle, or if you send your set by courier. That's the two situations where identified where you need a carnet. Show, Amy, Casper, do you have anything else to add?
No, true. The only thing that happens sometimes is that if you have big size or odd size luggage outside of your normal checked-in luggage and hand luggage, then it might be necessary, but mainly if it's about very technical materials. See, if you have very valuable instruments, you might even wish to work with a carnet, so you will be able to bring it back to your own country, that it is your possession. In these cases, we always advise artists to bring specifications of that they own the material.
Yeah, and I think we have one of our shows called Captive. We have a set that we should transport by vehicle, but we also have a flying set which breaks down into snowboard bags. So if you're in the process of making a new show, it might be something to consider, so you can take it with you kind of as luggage, rather than going through the whole carnet vehicle route. Just something to consider.
Skateboard bags and golf bags are fantastic things for artists to transport odd size materials, because they are allowed anywhere. Nobody would ever stop them in airplanes. Fantastic material.
Or tarpaulin and gaffer tape.
Yeah, make it hard to open. No, this came up as a creative solution as well, or how companies might approach making future work. And for those that are making ground-based dance, I think there was a focus to keep it light enough to travel via hand luggage. But it's a potential. Another question on carnet. So to clarify, we all have to go out via Dover if we want to drive with a carnet. We're based in Southwest Plymouth, so Roscoff is our normal ferry. So quite a particular question on the port that they needed to leave via. Amy, have you got any experience on that from?
I'm afraid I don't know specifically. I think you can go out by other ports. I think once we actually come out of the EU, they'll set up kind of different where you can get your carnet stamped and stuff. Where they'll be, not quite sure. But yeah, I would imagine it's not all via Dover, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, when we worked on the guide with Kevin, we asked ourselves the same question. And the information we found was that in pretty much every international airport and ports in the country, you can get your HEA carnet stamped. It just looks like some places don't have the right infrastructure quite in place. So you need to make phone calls in advance to make sure that you can actually do come with your carnet. But yeah, it's definitely not just in Dover.
Lovely. So last question. Oh no, that's been answered. That's fine. Last question on Carnet then, before we shift over to some visa and permit questions. Regarding carnets, are there any issues with materials that you take? For example, things that are used or destroyed during performance, so don't come back. I wonder if anyone's came across that.
So maybe I can get the information I have from actually from Jay Dunbar, who helped us with this section on the guide. Jay was telling us that there's also a consumable section in the carnet. So there's some elements that I expected they're not going to come back. I guess like you need to drill more into the legislation to see what exactly is considered as a consumable. I know Elena prompted us to do some more work also on pyrotechnics.
Yeah.
So we need to include that in the guide for some of you who work with pyrotechnics. Apparently, there's some like strict regulations around that. But for the rest of it, and it's possible to include consumables in carnet.
Yeah, sure.
The other solution is to get the destination festival to source it for you. You've done that before, but again, you know, I don't think they're going to be that strict at border in checking. So I think there's a degree of wiggle room, and they're not unreasonable people at the border either. So.
Yeah, Casper.
One of our team members had a bicycle with him within the container that was transported, and it broke down during the festival. But we were advised to bring back the bicycle, to at least have it with you, that the carnet is still correct. So if this is what you mean with broken stuff or things that go lost during your work in another country, we got recommended to, even if it's broken down, to bring it back to fill the list.
And I'm guessing that's particularly relevant for expensive bits of equipment as well. Maybe larger tech or digital bits of equipment or whatever. I'm going to move on to some questions that are coming in around visas and work permits. So quite a specific one here, but let's see if we can answer it. For EU artists coming into the UK, is permitted paid engagement still an option post-Brexit for engagements that are less than 1 month, say for a rehearsal period, as an alternative to going through the sponsorship tier 5 route? Sure, have you got, yeah.
Sorry, can you just point to where that question is? Because I didn't quite capture it all, or say it again.
Open question, it's at the very top, and it's for EU artists coming into the UK. Is permitted paid engagement still an option post-Brexit?
Yes.
I think the answer is we don't know.
It's very unknown, unfortunately. But yeah, we have some shows that in the pipeline that engages artists based in EU, and we're just costing out the worst case scenario of what it might cost. So I think in planning, it's advisable to do that. And if you don't have to pay, then that's money saved. It's kind of the approach we're taking at the moment.
So budgeting for those visas being required rather than going through permitted paid engagement if it's not an option.
Yeah, I mean, tier 5, I wouldn't. It depends on how long that you're engaging this person, because if you go for tier 5, then you kind of have to then give them a sizable contract, and you have to pay the minimum agreeable rate, which I think has gone up to something like 26,000 for tier 2. maybe it's more like 24. I can't remember the exact figure, but you kind of have to basically treat them as an employee if you go for the tier 2 or tier 5 route. So it's a bit more complicated. So you have to just bear that in mind whether it's worth it.
Brilliant. And then a question around specific work permits. So I understand performers will likely need separate work permits for every country they tour to. What do you expect will be the situation regarding work permits for British performers who are employed by and tour to Europe with a company based in EU? Sure. You're on, I've got you on mute. There we go.
Yeah, I was just thinking, again, it's really hard to estimate, and the current guidelines is really vague. It sort of says it depends on which country you are going to. So I think it's just a bit of a wait and see thing at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think it will not pose too many problems. I work with Hurrican. They are based in Madrid. Candelaria is Argentinian. Arthur is French from Paris. They work with 2 Chilean dancers and they tour the fucking whole world. How hard can it be to work with a UK-based person? And so I think we make a huge problem out of nothing here. I can hardly imagine that the EU would prevent UK citizen to come and work in the EU for this kind of reasons. I don't see it. The other way around, neither do I see it.
Amy, you wanted to add as well?
Yeah, I think when we're thinking about visas, because that's one of the main sort of concerns going in to touring next year. There's the Schengen visa, which if we can work off that would be great. And then who knows whether we'll need an additional work permit on top of that. But then worst case scenario, if we can't use a Schengen visa, we can't work on it for whatever reason, then worst case scenario, which we're planning is, or planning for, should it happen, is we may need to get visas from each country we go into, which when you actually think about the logistics involved in that is slightly mind-boggling, because we could be in a situation where you need to get each of your performers' passports to each embassy in the UK to get a visa. And that's just, it's going to be really tricky if that's the case, but hopefully there'll be a system that comes in. I know several people have talked about an artist passport. It's just rumors at the moment, but something like that to enable us to tour freely. What we can hope that something like that comes in. But if it's really hard to plan a tour at the moment with those considerations, because if we do go down the Schengen visa route, a lot of, well, they all have the 90-day and 180-day kind of rules. So that's what I'm thinking about when I'm planning my tour. But I can't go to contract or sign any deals until I know that's the case, because if that tour no longer works because those rules are no longer there, or they've changed or got stricter, or they're much freer, then my whole tour doesn't work. So again, contracts are going to have to be signed later until all of that is much clearer.
And I think you are in quite a position with contracted artists as well. I think there's an extra layer of tracking days for freelance artists that are working across perhaps multiple companies, which will be an interesting one to navigate as well. I think, Sho, as well, you mentioned, I think, in your case studies, how we acknowledge, like financially acknowledge the time that it takes to get the visas as well for artists to visit embassies. And yeah, it's an extra logistic and consideration, but absolutely possible. Axel, did you want to add something as well?
Yeah, thank you. Just around work permits, because we've included a section on work permits in the guides. Just to flag up that work permits are very different from one country to another. And like in lots of European countries, there's actually no work permit needed for artists who come and perform. I know that's the case in France, for example. In some other countries, you need the work permits. So we'll include in the guide a section that covers all of the EU 27 countries. So you can look into it in more details. But in the majority of cases, performers don't need work permits when it's for a short performance or for a short stay.
Casper, there's a question specifically for you that's from someone who's interested to hear more about the possibility of UK companies setting up or becoming part of an organisation based in Europe. Is there anything else you can say about that? And that came up in your case study a fair amount.
Well, it's a quite recent thing, and I would like to return the question to Axtrax, or maybe in collaboration with the other UK bodies in the field, to see what would be the interest between UK companies, if needed, to create a second base or a system in Europe. Because if every company has to find it out for himself, it's going to be a lot of work. And if we team up with all the companies who are interested, and I think best be guided by Alderarts UK, Axtrax, NASA, ISAN, what is all the organizations in the UK. If you team up together, or at least have the companies together who would want to look in it together, then you can do it one time for all. Is that an answer?
I think so. Sho, you were going to add something as well, Sho? No, you're not unmuted.
No, I didn't have anything.
Thanks, Casper. Yeah, interesting conversation then to keep having with Axtrax to see if there's any standardization we could look at setting up a company in the EU and what that entails. There's no further questions from attendees at the moment, but feel free to add any questions in whilst we have the last 10 minutes or so. I wanted to ask the panelists, just because we've got quite different perspectives on the topic of working with agents. So what the potential of UK companies working with an EU agent to do their work. And Casper, you're obviously speaking from the perspective of an agent, and then I know that Sho and Amy both had different perspectives on what the potential of that was and what how that would work for their companies. So Sho, is that something that's of interest for you? And if yes, why? And if not, why as well?
Sorry, can you say that again?
I'm saying is the potential of working with an EU agent to help your work tour from UK to EU, is that of interest to you?
Yeah, it would be of interest. I think it would be with companies like us. It would also be someone we need to have a quite close understanding with, mainly because we have quite a specific way of talking about inclusivity and disability and how that's represented. So yes, it's quite nuanced when it comes to different languages. We realize that, but yeah, we tend to not work with agents so much on that front. But you know, if it means it makes international touring, then that is definitely an option.
Thank you. And Amy, what about Motion House?
Yeah, we have used agents in the past. I think when it comes to this, even when using an agent, it doesn't negate the costs that Brexit is going to entail. In fact, it probably just adds more on because you've then got an agent to pay. And I think we're quite well placed as Motion House. We've got quite a good network, so we've got kind of contacts in place. So we're not adverse to it, but it's not something where is at the forefront of our minds right now.
Casper, what's your thoughts on the potential?
Yeah, I think any company should work with an agent because it gives a lot of more knowledge. And the interesting thing is that companies always look to their own relation with an agent and forgets that the agent is working with more companies, and the knowledge combined serves all. So working with an agent is sharing knowledge between companies, and that is a very good thing, and that might help a lot in many cases. And Europe is big, too big for one company.
Great. So there's another question on national insurance. The question is, some of their artists have to get A1 forms to show that they pay social security charges in the UK. Will this still be possible post-Brexit? So will the A1 form still be functional and an option post-Brexit? Axel?
Yes. It's really hard to say now. We just don't know yet. Everything points to the fact that we won't need to provide A1 because we won't need them anymore, because we'll have to use a different system, but we just don't know what the system is yet. So I mean, we need to provide A1 until the 31st of December, and then let's see. There might be a different system in place for each of the 27 countries. There might be a unified system for EU. It's really unclear. Amy, Sho, did you think about that?
It's definitely one of those things that whenever we make a list of things we need to think about, A1 forms and social security contributions, it definitely features on them, but it's really, we just don't know, and it's really hard to guess what system might come in place. Whereas with visas and Carnet, we can make some educated guesses. I feel like with A1 forms and what they're going to do, we just don't know. They'll probably bring in a new system. The A1 form I hated anyway, so we'll see.
And they are referenced in the guide, and it is an area obviously that's not confirmed yet, so it should be updated when information is confirmed. So signpost to the guide when it's released to you all. Brilliant. Well, there's no further questions in the chat, so I might introduce Elena back to do the final wrap-ups and then move on to the next session, which is around splitting us up and doing some breakout groups. So thanks. Oh, final point maybe from Sho.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to flag something up in the chat that's been circulating. I under sort of play a little bit too much about the Carnet listing. I just wanted to sort of pick up on some of the chats that, yes, they do need to be quite accurate. But, you know, if something goes wrong, you know, it's probably not something that you necessarily need to sleep over, you know, panic too much about. But yeah, I just also want to say that, yeah, the list does need to be accurate as far as possible. Yeah, but I think I underplay that too much. So I just wanted to make that out clear. Sorry.
Thanks for that clarification. Brilliant. Thanks again then. And I'm going to hand to Elena for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. So first of all, I'm just going to post on the chat a link, which you should all follow. I'll explain now. I'll also post it again because I'm afraid that it's probably going to be buried under other comments. But yeah, so, well, of course, I'm afraid we've run out of time. This was a really interesting discussion, and thank you so much to all our speakers for their contributions. As I mentioned earlier, we will continue to organize events and share resources around Brexit in the next months. So please keep an eye out on our newsletter and social media for updates. Of course, most importantly, there is going to be the guide that is going to come out next Friday. So I really think that that's going to be a great resource that hopefully is going to operate as a toolbox for all of you. We will now switch to the networking session after a 10 minutes comfort break. So we'll start at 3:40. It will be great to see many of you there. I posted a link in the chat and you should also have it in your inbox. But I'll post it again just because I can see that lots of people are messaging. So basically, if you just click on that link in 10 minutes, we'll see you there, and it'll be great to see many of your faces. Okay, thank you.